A warm welcome to the American Theatre Wing Seminar on Working in the Theatre. These are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And as we are about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the American Theatre Wing's Tony Award, I am reminded that this is the 22nd year that we have brought you these Working in the Theatre seminars. We are indeed pleased to bring you this unique opportunity to look behind the scenes from the perspective of performers, producers, playwrights, directors, designers, choreographers, agents, and set and costume designers, plus the unions and guilds that work with and for these people. They provide invaluable insight and expertise for theater students, theater professionals, and theater goers. The American Theatre Wing, as many of you know, is the founder of the theater's highest award, and we are justly proud of it, named in honor of a woman named Antoinette Perry. But the American Theatre Wing works year-round. It's more than just the Tony Awards. It gives a great deal of background to the Tony Award. And the programs that we do are all geared to service, entertainment, and education, designed to nurture and enhance excellence in the theater, and to bring audiences to the future of the theater. I might add we've been doing this for over 50 years and doing it fairly well, I think. In addition to these seminars, our very successful Introduction to Broadway program has brought over 50,000 high school students to the New York City Broadway shows, and these come from the 5 boroughs of New York, and they are brought to the theaters as a cooperative venture with the Board of Education and the generosity of the Broadway producers who make tickets available to us at a very, very small sum. And we in turn turn these over to the Board of Ed, who make them available to the students. And the students pay individually for their ticket, which is a very important part of this program, that they learn to pay for and buy a ticket. They're not brought en masse to the theater. They've made the decision. They've made the commitment. And it's a very exciting thing to see these students come and see the excitement as they see their very first Broadway show. And what magic the Broadway theater, all theater as a matter of fact, but what magic the live theater has to give to them. We're also very excited and pleased about a new program called Theater in Schools, which is, again, just that. And we bring professionals from every area of the theater to talk to the students at schools and discuss with them what it is to work in the theater. Designers, playwrights, directors, and producers come as well under the banner of the Wing. And it's a very important program because it gives the students a language about the theater and also an anticipation of what they are about to see. These seminars are one of the most important archives of theatrical history that I can think of. And as I've told you, we've been doing them for 22 years. And in those 22 years, we've had almost everybody in the theater as taking part in it. And it's a wonderful roster of knowledge that we have. Today's seminar is on that very important part of the theater. They bring the magic alive to you. And it also carries with it an award as well. It is the set designers, the costume, the lighting, and the directors that bring the whole thing alive to you. And unlike the Tony Awards, this American Theatre Wing's Award on Design is given to both Broadway, off-Broadway, and off-Broadway. And so without further ado, I welcome you, and I ask that George White, who is president of the O'Neill Theater Center and a director and a very, very fine member of the Wing's Friends, and is also a very, very fine person in his own right, as just man about the world, as George directs in both China and Russia. And Professor Tish Dates, who has organized this for us and is a theater critic and has overseen the awards on design. I thank you very much for being here, and I'm going to turn this over to our co-chairs, who will then in turn introduce our panel, who have earlier received an award and a check for their contribution to the theater. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you and welcome. It's a great pleasure to be co-moderating with George White today. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. On my right is Gerald Gutierrez, who won a Tony Award as Best Director for the Heiress, and he also directed, of course, the show which won the Tony for the Best Production of a Play on Broadway last season. And he is accompanied by his friend, was it Phil? Your attorney, sorry, your attorney, Phyllis. Next to Jerry is the scenic designer, John Lee Beatty, who has just won the 1995 American Theater Wing Design Award for the set of the Heiress. John Lee has had a lengthy career designing on Broadway, off-Broadway. Just among the many things he's done, he's put in 20 seasons as the designer at the Manhattan Theater Club and the Circle Repertory Company. His designs have been honored before by the American Theater Wing, and of course he's also won just about everything else that a scene designer could win, a Tony, an Obie, a Drama Desk Award, the Outer Critics Circle Award. You get the idea. And next to John Lee is Beverly Emmons. Beverly works all over Europe and the United States, designing opera, theater, dance for famous choreographers like Martha Graham and Merce Cunningham. Her work on Broadway has been honored by a Tony and 5 Tony nominations on top of that, an Obie and 2 Bessie Awards for her work off on Broadway. And she won just last season an American Theater Wing Design Award for Passion. She's back with us this year, having won for doing the lighting design for the Heiress. On my far left is Ralph Lee, the artistic director and designer for the Medowee River Company. Ralph designs absolutely amazing masks and costumes for puppets which people wear. He has designed all over the country. He's designed for Saturday Night Live, but mostly for theater. And he started the Village Halloween Parade, I think 21 years ago, but he'll correct me later if I've got that a little bit off. He also has worked for about 6 years now with a Mayan writers collaborative in San Cristobal de las Casas, and he will explain to us later the relevance of that. But he has won the award this year for noteworthy unusual effects for his design of Heart of the Earth, a Popul Vuh Story. Next to Ralph is the person who, in my opinion, is the great actress of her generation, Cherry Jones. I've been following Cherry's career since she appeared as the daughter in He and She at BAM more years ago than I think either one of us wants to count. She then went up and appeared in many, many wonderful performances at the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and has done some of the best performances I have ever seen since then in New York, and plays by Paula Vogel and A Light Shining in Buckinghamshire and Our Country's Good. And she has won a number of awards for her appearance as the Heiress. I mean, Cherry is the Heiress. In that play on Broadway, she won the Tony, the Drama League Award, the Drama Desk Award, the Outer Critics Circle Award, and she was good enough to join us today to talk about the design of the show along with Jerry and the designers. And finally, next to Cherry is Jane Greenwood, the costume designer for many years on and off Broadway. She's also designed for the Metropolitan Opera, the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. She has received 13 Tony nominations, and in addition to winning the American Theater Wing Costume Design Award for her costumes for the Heiress. She also has won once before, when these awards were known as the Mayan Awards, she won for designing the costumes for Tartuffe. Welcome all.
Great.
Ralph, a Popul Vuh Story, which is what it was called when I first saw it at the Public Theater before it moved to Intar and got the name Heart of the Earth, is about a Mayan creation myth. Could you tell us a little bit about this? For instance, what do the words Popul Vuh mean? What does that refer to?
Well, Popul Vuh, from what I understand, means something like the Book of Counsel. And it is, in a sense, or was, in a sense, the Bible for the Mayan civilization, or part of it at any rate. And it's a creation story insofar as it talks about how the world was formed and why such and such animal has a stripe down his back, and why the sun and the moon are in the sky. It explains the universe for people, and it also tells about the creation of the first humans, how they came about. And it's also kind of like a book of the dead for people. It describes how you get through hell and up to heaven. It sort of lays out a map, a way of succeeding to become, in a sense, resurrected. And the most interesting part of the story for me, and the part that I felt was a really compelling story in itself, and one that was worth dramatizing, is the story of a pair of twins who are young boys, and they're great ball players, and they disturb the lords of death who live in the underworld because they play ball so well and so noisily. And so the lords invite them down there to play a ball game with them. And immediately they trick them, they decapitate them, and you think that's going to be the end, but it ain't. The twins are reborn, and they go back to hell a second time, and because they have this pre-knowledge of what the underworld is like, they are able, through wonderful ways of trickery and outsmarting and pure devilry, they're able to outsmart the lords of death. And it's a very compelling story, and you feel that the Mayans must have had some really formidable lords of death in their society, just as maybe we do in ours. And by using their wits, they're able to circumvent them. And so that's the basic story there. And I felt that it was a story that really had to get out there and be that more people should be acquainted with it. And so that's why I set about dramatizing it.
You seem to have brought some friends with you. Could we invite them up here without fearing for our lives?
Well, I talked to them beforehand, and I think they'll be relatively good. I should give a little word of explanation before they come up here. In my haste to come here today, I forgot one essential element, which is an inner crown that one of these large puppets wears, whereby his head attaches to his person. And so when they are appearing on stage, I am going to have to hold his head in place so that you can get the complete illusion of what they look like.
That's not usually part of the show.
That's
this is a
not usually
bonus.
part of the
Before we
story.
get to that, George, are you going to pick up with?
Well, yeah, I would. I'd like to also, because we are talking so much about design, I'd like to start I suppose, since I am a director, but I'd like to start with the director a little bit because so much stems from your basic concept and in terms of how you're going to do the show and how it's going to look. I assume it comes from your head to these people, or would you refute that? I mean, how did you choose the people, your team?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how. I've done something like 15 plays with John, and 10 or something we've all worked together a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't know or pretend to know how we work together. I know that we share a certain aesthetic. I know that it takes a lot of planning. We know each other's taste. If we're to concentrate on the set for the moment, I don't know. Help me.
Well, yeah, there was interesting because that set for the Heiress is marvelous. We had an earlier seminar, and Heidi Landesman was here, and she was talking about her set for Moon Over Buffalo, right, which I loved as well. But she said, the minute, from her point of view, generally speaking, when the curtain goes up and there you are, you see a one set, a basic unit set, her normal instinct is to just despair. And of course, I thought, particularly John, your set, Brennan Gill earlier said, and I agreed, that's a wonderful set. You want to get up and be in it. You would hope that you'd be invited to tea there. I mean, it just is a comfortable one. And that's very tricky to do. And what is the process of all of you working together on that?
What comes first, I think.
Exactly. Where's the chicken and where's the egg?
I don't know. It was. I really don't, because we've done so many plays together. But I know that with the Heiress, I didn't want. I wanted a modern. There were modern, contemporary reasons for doing it. I thought it was viable and stage worthy.
What were those?
Well, damn good.
It's an old play,
Damn good parts for actors, and I don't think there's enough good acting on Broadway. I thought it was an American play. I don't think there are enough American plays on Broadway. And I thought that the Lincoln Center Theater is particularly supportive in seeing through the artistic visions of its directors and designers. The thing about that set, though, it looks like you want to live in it, but it's a house of scrim. Mm-hmm. So it isn't what it appears to be. I mean, it's all soft, and it's a lace curtain, ghosty room. It gives the illusion of warmth at times, yeah, especially when lit by Beverly. But it's a very a courageous design, I think.
Were you here? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Well, two reasons. One, actually, the other designers helped me. Jane Greenwood and I had a little heart-to-heart in Seattle. I had done too many shows with sofas, and I was feeling all I ever do with these rooms, and the reviewers always say, oh, you want to live in them, and you could just move in. And I was so sick of that, and I wanted to do things like Arsenis gets to do. And you always want to be someone else. You don't want to be yourself. So. But a few key things. Jane said, first of all, it's a good play, which was very helpful knowledge that it's going to work, that there's something there worth pursuing. And also what Jerry said, that there was a modern, that there's a reason for doing it now. And I started looking at the world we live in and thinking about how much money Catherine Sloper has, and try to think of what we think now looks rich, rather than going back and looking at pictures of, was the play done in the 40s?
Originally, yeah.
The Wendy Hiller was the 40s.
1947.
40s, or looking at the original period even at first, but to actually look at what we think of as looking rich now. And I took that, and then, of course, I wandered like a crazy person through Washington Square, looking in people's windows. And, all that, and of course, then reading. Jane had also just read the novella, I think, and recommended that, so I went to the bookstore and bought that.
Me, research. Oh,
But that I was going to get into, because you said that, and I want to get onto research, and I also am going to reveal a secret that I was told just before we went on, on camera, but about the costumes. It's okay, relax.
Yeah.
But the thing that intrigues me is when you said how things would look rich to a 1990s audience. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to sort of get into your head and the thought process of what kind of research, what went through your mind to make that happen, rather than going, let's say, to the equivalent of Better Homes and Gardens, of that period. What went through your mind? How did you do that? What was your thought process in that?
Backwards, of course, like any designer. But, well, first of all, I was conscious of the 1940s, the play being written then, and what they admired in that period. There's a whole, I call it Hollywood Regency, but it's a whole style of interior decoration that we're very familiar with. Mostly our parents had it. It's a lot of mahogany and sort of Duncan Fife imitations. And I realized I had to discount all of that because we don't have that today, except at the Bombay Company, sort of. And so,
how do you keep doing what you're doing, saying what you're doing, saying what you're saying? How do you keep that the set from getting in the way of the play?
Oh, that's what he helps.
And how does he help that?
How does he help that? Because he keeps talking about the play and doesn't talk enough about the design, and you're desperate to talk about the design, and he's talking about the play and the casting.
Well, I'll tell you, this is where...
And of course, that keeps you thinking about the play rather than about the draperies, which really are the least important thing in the long run. But you eventually see that all the choices relate to the script. And so talking about finding out that Sherry was going to be the heiress tells me a lot about what the room can look like. So finding out who else is going to work on it, whatever.
Also, I think, though, wouldn't you agree that as a kid, I was trained in working on the play and developing a set to imagine the set from the top down, not from the audience forward, not the elevation. Where is the room to act? And where is the furniture? It doesn't really matter. I care less about the ground plan. It's critical. In my opinion, because there are some, I've seen I've seen lots of beautiful sets where there's no room for actors, and I think we begin that way, and where the entrances are, and where the logic is, and then trying to find. I didn't want a drawing room either.
And I was reinventing a drawing room, which was the hard part. And what scared me so much was when we came up with the scrim walls and Jerry. Everything that appealed to Jerry about the movie were impossible things to put on stage, seeing things in reflections, seeing through things, and going around corners. And then I realized, well, there has to be a way of doing this on stage, which was mirrors where you can actually sometimes see through two of the mirrors to the back side of the scenery in this version. That came to me, and then I thought, but this is like reinventing those horrible scrim sets from the 50s that we had to imitate when I was in college, and we don't want to do this again. And I kept envisioning these reviews where they said John Lee Beatty reinvents the 50s or something. That's what scared me so much. I actually went to Andre Bishop and told him how scared I was, which was kind of a mistake because we all know and love him, and he's so supportive that he was scared for me, and of course we had a scared producer then next. So.
Hold that thought. I've got to detour us back just for a minute because we promised these actors who are lurking off stage that they could go home right after the beginning of this show, and we've forgotten about them.
And even though I try hard to make these costumes comfortable.
Yes.
They are big and heavy.
And they're standing there. And then welcome, creatures from the underworld.
This is a first on these shows, I'll tell you. Wow.
Oh, they're actually fabulous.
Ralph, can you talk to us a little bit about what the design challenges were for these costumes, keeping them wearable?
Right. Well, I'm going to have to remove his head in order to
yes,
talk
properly.
Right. But in developing these costumes, You know, I've made a lot of large puppets in my life, but and I've found that when actors have to speak with these things on, it can be a problem. If they're totally covered up, their voices are muffled and all of that. And so I've sort of developed a kind of feeling whereby you know that the actor is in there. You may be able to see part of him. And so it's sort of like he's the core in there, but then there's this extension, which is the puppet. And so this actor's face, for instance, is totally visible inside there. Of course, with the appropriate lighting, it doesn't take the focus. But it's there, and the audience can see that his arms are manipulating the other arms, the arms of the puppet. But somehow or other, because if the image is strong enough, the visual image is strong enough, then your focus as an onlooker will go to that image, and you'll just kind of forget the other person is there. Mm-hmm. And you can go back to him if you want to, but he's always there. And I'm not trying to pretend he's not. And with these particular figures, that's what I wanted to do, because they have a lot to say in the piece. They're real wise-ass kind of characters. And so I wanted them to, you know, their personalities, and there's the sense of them as actors to be clearly there. And with this guy, you can see his face through his mouth very clearly when it opens. And of course, he's just back to the lace. he has just lace on his chin there, which it makes it very easy for his voice to come through.
That's just wonderful.
Could you introduce the actors to us?
And the characters.
Right. Yeah. They're just going to, by way of introduction, they're just going to do like two or three little lines.
We are spilled blood and broken bones. We are cancer and hemorrhage of the marrow. We drink pus and blood and like it.
Okay.
Bravo.
So underneath this costume is Will Howe, who has played this part since we started working on this show. And in this one is Bruce Barton, who has put this costume on for the first time in his life today. Because the other actors weren't available. And I must say, when I first made this toad costume here, we were having auditions, and I would bring in some of the masks as I was making them for the auditions, and you know, when you're making something, you don't necessarily know whether it's going to work or not. And Will came to the audition, and he put this thing on, and it was like they came together immediately. And I said, "Oh, yeah, this can work." So it was a tremendous relief.
Great.
Thank you very
Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Does that mean that as you're directing then, your designs are already fairly well along and the performers can rehearse in them from the outset?
Usually when I start the rehearsals, some of the design elements are cooking. And there are usually some elements that I don't really know how I'm going to do yet. And I sort of save that until the rehearsals have been progressing for a while. And then I say, oh, I kind of, you know, some actor will say, well, couldn't we do it this way? Or somebody will give you a little clue somewhere along the line, and you begin to get a hunch as to how you should do it. And so then you can go home and build it. So since I function in two capacities, I'm usually working kind of double
You're very
time.
lucky.
Yeah.
That's right.
Ralph Lee, the director, is conferring with Ralph Lee, the designer.
Right.
That is true. Well, you know, we were speaking, Ralph, you had mentioned, parenthetically, by the way, you were a real hero of mine because I never knew who started that Greenwich Village parade. But anyway, whoever did was marvelous, so congratulations. But we're talking about costumes, and I wanted to bring this up with Jane, and also have you reveal, or Cherry did earlier, in the Heiress, those costumes are absolutely wonderful, particularly the Heiress costume, you know, your costumes, and they look like these marvelous velour, heavy, wonderful designs, and yet you solve that problem because running around as you tend to do, moving very quickly, unless you are in incredible physical shape to run around that. But you revealed how you were able to do that, how those costumes...
You know, people always think that these clothes are so heavy, and actually they're very light. And it was the underpinnings of the clothes, the petticoats and the corsets that created the shape. Therefore, the dress could be a very light silk or a very light cotton or whatever, and it really, I don't think it's too heavy.
No.
No, I mean, that's exactly. But I mean, that's what is so surprising because you think that they have that wonderful power to them. When you also color is terribly important.
Well, red helps.
I mean, yes, exactly. But of course, then you obviously have to work with John as to making sure that how all those colors interact, and also the men's clothes, which are not just black, which went, you know, of that period. But
well, that is important, and I think John and I over the years have worked together a great deal and have really found most times to be very harmonious in terms of the way we get together with the scenery and the clothes for whatever reason. But very often we don't talk, and that's what's so amazing.
It's ESP, is it?
No, it's spooky.
Yes, it's...
I'm not kidding. Tell them about the new one.
Our new play, Northeast Local, Jane and I did not speak at all.
About
and
colors.
the scenery and the costumes came up on stage together. In the first scene, they went together fine, no problem. In the second scene, oddly enough, they were sort of in the same color range, but different enough that the actors stood out. And I thought, oh, that's great. It's such a wonderful accident. And then the next scene came up. That was a maroon scene. And then the next scene came up, and that was pale blue and green. And the actor came out in green, and then there was dark green gingham. And then the next scene came up, and that was the red scene.
And on it went.
Red and rust. And then the next one was orange and
stylized. And
orange and avocado, and orange and avocado came out. It was bizarre. It was really bizarre.
Now, that's not to say we don't talk about things, but it just seemed that because they weren't...
first get together.
But we were so busy gossiping that the design hardly comes.
Especially this.
it comes out of the gossip, I see. But,
Sure.
no,
But you also, before we go any further, you have to know that Cherry Jones is in extremely good physical shape. She bicycled here today. She could have lifted
She
a
could
scooter
have carried
forward.
heavy dresses.
Right. In fact, I got a most amusing letter the other day from someone in New Jersey asking me that they had had an argument with some friends and they couldn't solve it until I answered them. They were under the impression that I had created some machine that carried Cherry Jones up the staircase so quickly. Because she looked like she floated up the stairs, and they were convinced to solve the argument. I had to tell them about the machine, and I had to write back and say that Miss Jones not only was in very good shape,
What a wonderful illusion.
but she actually practiced, you know, that Cherry
You get that
practiced.
automated look.
Well, we did. Yeah, we did rehearse that.
You practiced that a lot.
The speed, her first entrance, we rehearsed for a long time.
Yeah, she
Slow,
hurdles
fast,
down the
and
stairs.
slow. Yeah.
But that's interesting because then,
How did you do that?
Well, it was the amount of fabric. Cherry and I, the first time we were on the set, rehearsed that. Of course, I secretly wanted to wear the red dress so that I could wear that because it's such a beautiful dress. But I lived through my actors, and so I let her do it. And she starts slow, builds up speed, and then comes to a halt so that the skirts gather wind, and so she appears to float. I mean, that was all rehearsed.
Well, was it rehearsed in a rehearsal skirt, or was it? I mean, how did, or did you? And you talked with Joan, Jane about that. Yeah.
In the rehearsal room, the stairs are just taped out on the, and we sort of forgot that there were even stairs on the set. I mean, we would sort of, Franny and I would sometimes kind of pretend walking up and down the steps on the tape, you know. But it wasn't until we got onto the set. And in fact, I remember the first day. So many of my favorite memories from this entire experience, not just because we're here at a design panel, had to do with those moments when everything was made clear to me through the design. I'm going to just take a tangent to say that the first most exciting day was the day I went to sit for the portrait for the poster, for Mr. McMullen at his studio. And I had already had a couple of fittings with Jane, and I had never had the privilege of working with Jane before, and I'd heard Jane's name 1,000 times, and Beverly's, and Mr. John Lee Beatty's, and I was so thrilled to be getting to work with them, and we had had a fitting to get the silhouette of the corset. I will never have a corset as magnificently made as that one ever again, unless I get to work with Jane again. I mean, you know, right down to the 1/100th of an inch. She got exactly what she wanted in the silhouette, got me to lose just enough weight that she could get that waist to where she wanted it. She said, well, we will be down to 25. And as I sat looking pretty at 29. Yes, you did. And I took notes. But I remember walking into that studio, and I thought, well, perhaps Jane's assistant, Alona, would be there, and Mr. McMullen and his assistant. And to my amazement, I walked in the door, and there was Gerald Gutierrez, and John Lee Beatty, and Jane, and her assistant, and Eric Winterling, who built the clothes, and Paul Huntley, who designed the wigs, and obviously Mr. McMullen, and Beverly, you weren't there, but I'm sure it was a very good reason why you were. And I thought, this is going to be extraordinary, that all of these masters have shown up for a sitting for a poster. It never occurred to me that you all would all be there, making sure that everything was just perfect.
Oh, but you see, it was a tremendous help for us because we were getting a head start on really the shape of her clothes and her hair and everything else, and so it was a great advantage because it is complicated when you look back at another period, and everybody has to work very hard to sort of really get it right. So we were all delighted to be there.
Well, you know, there is something too that, because you were talking about the shape of the corset and all of that, but that has to start, I assume, and I've always felt this, from character. Why would she wear a red dress? Is that between you and Jane?
It's in the
Henry
Well, yes, right.
It is it's a perfect example of this woman's need to please her father, that she goes on her own and has a dress made the same color that the dead mother used to wear ribbons in her hair from the same color, and so it's slightly too gaudy for her, and the dress overwhelms her. And that was the hardest part, I remember we had, was because it wasn't, it's easy to make her look ridiculous. And
you know, we wanted it to look sort of unsuitable, but not a joke.
Because she's not.
Yeah.
She's
well,
not.
that's it, because I think a lot of people, a lot of audience don't realize how incredibly important the clothes grow out of character.
I remember I thought I had done a terrible thing. One of those very first fittings, Jane was showing me, you know, book after book of these incredibly gaudy, horrible 1850 dresses with everything but the kitchen sink, you know, on them. And I remember looking at them and thinking, well, it has to be unsuitable but not irritating. And I remember Alona, Jane's assistant, looked at me and said, Jane Greenwood could never design anything that was irritating.
Unless the corset was too tight.
Oh, right. For the actor, yeah.
But you know, now I wanted to get on to, I'm sorry, but I wanted to get on to lighting, because we haven't talked about lighting. And lighting is I think people, again, civilians don't understand how extremely important and how different kinds of lighting. Now, you've directed, you know, I mean, lighting, design lighting for opera and for dance, and again, for the Heiress. I thought it was absolutely marvelous, and I thought it was because you couldn't tell it was lit, in the sense it wasn't, you don't say, my gosh, that's lit, unless you're into it. But it all worked, and it's very, very subtle lighting. And it's absolutely marvelous. I mean, people don't go in and out of shadows and all kinds of things like that. Talk about how you approach lighting anything, and also a little bit about the differences with dance, and just why.
This was an interesting challenge, actually, for me, because coming from dance and some of the avant-garde pieces I've done, where basically the space is open and one can put lights anywhere one wants, this is much more of a classic piece with a ceiling and with walls, and it's a closed box with a very limited place for lights, only in the front of the auditorium and directly on the first and second electric. And so I had to find a way into this world, this set, when there was physically not much of a way in, and to be able to give some dimensions. And I found it, actually, lighting is always an interesting combination between what one imagines one might do and then what's physically possible, and sometimes those are very divergent. But in this particular case, I found that I could put a boom out of sight of the audience, off of those windows, where I could get, you know, looking at the set, I felt something very real here. Yes, the lace and the other ideas are going on, but this play is grounded in a kind of reality. We have to believe this. This isn't surreal. This isn't weird. This is real in a way. And so I happen to know Washington Square. I know that house sits on the north side of the square, and so those windows are facing south. And therefore, the script says in the second scene, when the boyfriend arrives to overwhelm her and propose to her, he can be hit by sunlight at 3 o'clock in the afternoon coming from that boom right to the center doorway of the arch. And so I said, fine. October, 3 o'clock? Yeah, okay. The sun would be just there. And so that sort of gave me my way in, is to both tie, and then thinking about that as an idea, this man is an intruder from outside in her life. And so in the two times when he comes very powerfully, you can get him from that same location with the first time golden sunlight. He's the golden boy. He's coming. And then at the end in sunset, when he comes to beg forgiveness. And he can be caught in that sun. So that gave me an angle, and that gave me a romantic color idea. It also gave me a way of connecting it to nature. And so then I said, oh, well, okay, then another scene, it's 11 o'clock in the morning, so the sun would be there, and oh yes, I can put lights that will do that in those windows. There are gray, the day he has jilted her and is desolate and gray, and so the set will do that, and then looking at John's selection of colors, and then taking what daylight really is and how it works. The trick, of course, is that the daylight can only come through the windows, can't come through the lace walls, or you lose that conceit of that you can't see out there except you can. And that's where I built it from, basically, was to go from
Which must have been fun for you
nature.
to do it, because you have such also a spectrum of times of day, which is a great challenge, and also plot, which is. But of course, when you're lighting in avant-garde situations where people do want to see that there is a light, like there's a spot or something very, very specific.
No, this had to match.
When did lighting design come into its own in the theater?
Gene Rosenthal.
Well, there was usually just the pink spot, and you lit from behind or below. When did it become as much of a science?
Well, it's been growing. It's been growing as electronics have grown and computer control has grown. I mean, it used to be. I worked with Jules on a show in 1973 where 300 lights was massive for a musical, and now musicals have 1,000 lights.
They do?
Yeah, yeah, and they're all controlled individually.
She's also able, because of, like, for example, what you call birdies, these small instruments that we didn't used to have, she's able to put lights in places on the Heiress set where you would never dream that a light could be hidden. So, but we should also tell everybody about, I think if you've seen the Heiress especially, you'd be interested to know there are some tricks built into the set for the lighting. I don't think most people, unless you go backstage, realize that there's one staircase for Catherine to go up. There's another staircase behind the wall for a stagehand to go up with a light in his hands, and he follows Catherine up the stairs. So her halo of light is actually going up a second staircase. There's a rear projection screen between the two, so the back wall of the set is actually a luminous wall. It isn't a solid wall at all. It's rear projection screen. So there's that effect, and
that's the machine that gets her upstairs.
Yes. In answering your question, I did jump both of these gentlemen's intentions, in the sense that I was talking just light, completely what I brought to the party. Obviously, the necessity of the set in its translucency to reflect and change its color subtly. Also, you can't do that with an ordinary set. The rear wall is translucent and
so
changes.
The
ceiling is translucent and subtly changes color to reflect what's going on. We see through into the other room. And then Jerry had some very specific requests, one of which is the light behind her as it goes up the stairs. And
what gave you that idea? It's a wonderful idea.
Well, because
he always works from a moment, though, because when you work with Jerry, he tells you about a cool moment, and then you have to work backwards and do the whole rest of the play.
Right.
The Heiress by Ruth and Augustus Getz represents the kind of play that made me want to be in the theater. It was the kind of play I saw as a child go into plays. And I believe, with all due respect, that the art of the theater is the art of the actor. And I thought that the moment, the climax of that play is that incredibly complicated moment where you don't know whether you're happy for her or you don't know whether you're sad for her, and you know, and it's a moment of sexuality and complexity, and I had to go back from that. I knew that eventually, I didn't know how we would do it, but eventually I wanted her holding the damn lamp, and I needed that thing going up. She went, and at the end, as the curtain comes out, that is all the light that's left.
Yeah.
So it's a collapsing of light down to the profile of Miss Cherry Jones in a dress by Jane Greenwood.
Did you envision this in the very beginning, that light would be that extra dimension for you?
I'll get to that.
The light, I think the light, more so than other places, to a director, the lighting designer, I have the most fun with, because they come on last. And by this point, we're sick of each other. And at this point, we're sick of each other. And she's dealing with the actors who think, oh, you're ruining my performance by making me wear this color. So I get to have fun with the design, with the new one. She comes at the end. And because I remember we would try, what I love in tech rehearsals is sitting with a lighting designer, especially one as gifted as Beverly, and seeing what you can do. And I remember that day we were pulling all the light, pulling all that, till the big jilting scene Cherry Jones plays in the complete darkness. Well, and the one with, and Franny Sternhagen's the one sitting in the light.
Yeah, yeah, that was an important moment, because people have spoken about it. She's sitting in the dark. And that's not something a lighting designer can ever do by oneself. And in a way, without even talking about it, we were following a similar line because of my idea of the lit scenes being natural. Well, if she's sitting in the dark waiting for her boyfriend at 1 o'clock in the morning, it is black in that room. Now, how do we play this? Yes, a little tiny candle comes downstairs, but the audience has to see sufficiently to understand what they're saying to each other. It's just a technical problem. We have to see them. On the other hand, we have to understand the laughs. We have to understand that she's sitting in the dark, so that what was wonderful was sneaking. My intention was to see how low we can play it, and therefore I'm sneaking things up and listening for the director to say more, more, more. And in this particular case, she walked over to the sofa where previously I hadn't needed any light, and I went to make the next cue, which was, oh, now we need a little light to fill. And Jerry said, no, we know what she looks like. Leave her there. And that's, I mean, that could only be done.
Yeah, I noticed that darkness. And there were many times in the play when, there were dark shadows. I mean, there was no light in the alcove, and then that one light at the end. I mean, it was interesting how darkness became a real element in the play. And of course, it also comes from the period too. I mean, that's the last. You move the light with you, but it was very effective in the way
It's also,
it
I think,
read.
It's theatrical.
Yeah.
And,
Very
and it's
theatrical.
a moment, and why I sort of am uneasy on panels like this, because it sounds like there's more theory at work than, but it is, no, because there wasn't. I don't know how we did it, but it's the scene, the jilting scene is for me about resurrection, and it's about her coming from the dark into the light, and the reality that brings, and that the next scene is at dawn. There's a religious thing there for me, and I don't know why, but I don't, and so I'll be quiet now.
No, but that's terrific.
Though, about the light in 1850, those are argon lamps, which are patent lamps of the period. It's really because of doing Abe Lincoln in Illinois, which we did together. We know a lot about lamps, and that
period too.
And a continuum of period, because the 1850s, the 1850s is the last moment when you did have to live in the dark still. Right after that, we get into the 60s, you start getting oil lamps coming in, and everything changes, and then you get multiple lights. And it was fascinating doing the research, finding out how excited people were about birth of light, and how and the reflections in the mirrors. The reason a lot of mirrors were there were to reflect the light, and you see that in the play, and that becomes a very important element when the light passes. The mirror was part of these people's lives, but it is of this period. I always get sad in the last scene when he comes in the sunset. I think, you know, it's really very sad what's happening in the play, but also this is a period in time that's frozen here, you know, that these people... And James was writing about something that was old to him. He's remembering that time.
And the atmosphere is... Oh, sorry.
As an actress, do you have any thoughts about lighting? Does the lighting have to be important for you, for your face, for your body, for any one thing?
Well,
or will you take the whole of the play?
As an actress, the kind of lighting I like most is just atmospheric, that puts you where you're supposed to be. And that's exactly what Beverly and Jerry
I remember
collaborating
Lillian
together
Gish saying that she stopped working on the stage when they did away with footlights, because that was the only way that you could be well lit, was from the bottom up for an actress. And if you didn't have footlights, that you had, you know, not the proper kind of lighting. And listening to all of you here on the change in lighting, how important it is to the play itself, is just so revealing.
You did.
Cherry, I wonder if you could comment for us specifically on the ways that the set and the lighting and the costumes helped you to create your character. And I also hope that Jane will jump in and tell us how she managed to make someone as good-looking as you are look so plain. Obviously, the costume helped you to do that.
Stop.
I
know. Yes, the hair.
Well, you know, the hairstyle of the period is a bit of a killer. I mean, they do have those.
And that's your responsibility to do it.
Well, originally I look at the period and you embrace everything about it. And Paul Huntley, who of course is the great wig maker of all time, managed to come up with some very interesting styles. Don't you think he was instrumental in talking us into the fact that that was really the way to go with the barriers?
was really excited when I saw that style, because I
Yes.
knew, and every night when Elise does it for me, here, I'll give the television audience, it's this pathetic thing that wraps around the ears, and I fortunately have sort of elfin ears that slightly stick out, and every night I say to Elise, I want as much ear as we can get, because then I know that, but
And then later, as the style changes, and when she goes to Paris and she comes back and she's much more aware, she has a style which covers them and actually is more becoming in some way. It is also a little more, makes her look a little more mature. And all of these things help.
Did you two do a lot of research on this such as...
Oh, well, I always do. I mean, they always say I'm hopeless. I have far too much research and far too many books, but I don't think you can ever have enough. That's why I went back when we first read the play and went and read Mr. James that John was talking about in Seattle, because I felt that reading the book that the play had come from would give us a lot of...
Right, and you found out where
flavor.
James's aunt lived.
Yes.
If you find out that, you realize which direction the staircase goes up, because in her house, we know exactly
and he
where.
talked a lot about the clothes, too, that
Could
you
we
don't
hold
get
this
in the play.
and come, because I have to stop this for just 1 minute, while everybody stands and stretches and does whatever they have to do, and then come right down and continue with this very important part of it, of what goes into making of a play, so that the audience is not aware of any of this that goes in, but is just aware of some kind of magic that's happening on the stage for them, which is what you said is a play, is the theater. So please stand up, stretch, do whatever you have to do, and come right back again. Thank you, and we'll continue with it.
This is CUNY TV, Channel 75.
We're continuing the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theater. And this seminar is on design, and it is a very, very important and exciting and revealing seminar as well. We left off with the importance of lighting, for example, which the audience does not see. But the more that they do not see, the more important it is, I guess you would say that. And Beverly, would you continue? And Tish, perhaps you reintroduce your panel as we go on.
Certainly. Gerald Gutierrez, John Lee Beatty, Beverly Emmons, George White, Jane Greenwood, Cherry Jones, and Ralph Lee. And Cherry, I think, had just been beginning to comment on what she was able to use to create the character of Catherine Sloper from the work of each of the designers. She made some wonderful observations about the use to which she put the hairstyle in creating this shy, wealthy heiress. And I wonder if you could continue with the other designs.
I said to Jane, what will I say? What will I say about all these different designs? And Jane said, well, just say it starts with the silhouette of the corset and goes from there. And it's true for an actress, for an actor, it does. It sort of begins with, first we have to deal with what it is we're wearing and how that will affect our movement, and what we need to know that we don't know about how that should and will affect our movement. I know that Jane was a wonderful instructor on, it's very easy to come down a flight of stairs in a 1850 petticoat, and this predates hoop skirts by a couple of years, so this really is still the languid petticoats, and lots of them. But getting back up is the problem when you have that much bulk. It's light bulk, but it's bulky. And Jane, you know, always the upstage hand, just one hand, because most modern actresses, American modern actresses, don't have enough experience with large period skirts, because we don't do as much restoration or whatever. And we tend to always want to grab with both hands and pull up. And of course, the elegant way is just to find that, and what I do is I know that I have to grab till I feel my skin, so that I know I have each and every petticoat, because if you miss a petticoat, you're doomed, you're on your face. You get right till you feel the skin and very elegantly pull.
Franny fell down the stairs at a preview. Remember, she kept walking on.
Right.
And then she was in that cul-de-sac. She was stepping on her own skirt, and she couldn't get off it.
Well, I think partly that was because we were erring on a little longer than shorter.
And also her drinking.
Terrible.
Joke.
Not true.
Something that everyone who knows Franny Sternhagen will really know is true.
We're going to hear about that one.
Yes.
But you've never tripped on your skirts, then?
Oh, last night it was pathetic. What happens is, if the petticoats ever, because there's so many ruffles and layers, that if they ever fall flat, which they do unless they're starched and pressed twice a week, the hems, because Miss Greenwood is a taskmaster, and she makes sure that even on a rake stage, the hems are absolutely touching, just skimming the carpet. So you have no room for error. And last night, the petticoats had just gotten flat enough and the hems had gotten long enough that when I went down to shake Mrs. Montgomery's hand, I literally did one of these. Twice.
And probably every spectator thought it was part of your characterization.
Yes, it's clever.
You know, they thought, how wonderful, how did you do that?
I landed on Liz McKay's hand to stop me before I went into the pit. It was so but Jane taught each of us so much about these period costumes, because I think actors depend a lot on the research of our designers, so there was that, and then I remember the very first day that, I mean, I'm pretty good at reading models and set sketches, but there's nothing like seeing the real thing. And the first time you walk on a set, it's like Christmas morning, and you finally really get the world that you've been trying to approach in rehearsal all those weeks. And I remember walking, I came down the alleyway of the Court Theater, having never been there before, the very first day we moved into the theater. And I was too dumb to read the sign that said, stage door this way. And I walked into the basement door, and all the stagehand guys were going, oh, she's a smart one, you know, because I came wandering in the wrong door. And they I just said, where's the stage? And they just sort of pointed me up a staircase. And there are many staircases on this set that the audience doesn't see. There's a staircase, the front stoop staircase to 16 Washington Square is actually through a trap down into the basement. So we enter 16 Washington Square from the basement steps. And then, of course, there was fortunately another trap that suited the kitchen stairs. So there are kitchen stairs, front stoop stairs, and then an access staircase to the stage right area. And I remember I somehow wandered up that staircase, and I didn't really want to see the set until I could really fully walk onto it, but I just glanced, and I saw the newel post of that staircase and the carpeting and that front door, and there was even a plate on the front door that said Sloper, that no one ever sees. And suddenly, I got so excited I thought I was going to die. It suddenly dawned on me the world that we were about to enter together as collaborators on this extraordinary piece that none of us had an idea anybody was going to. I was just talking to a nice lady in the restroom about the fact that none of us had a clue the way this production was going to capture people's imaginations.
And
it's just because
the curtain going up even for you.
Yes, it really, you know, and it's because every part of the collaboration was in a way, by accident, this wonderful perfection, and it all just sort of came together, and it's because everyone is so.
I see Jane's face. It isn't quite by accident.
Well, no. I didn't really mean that.
I know. You were talking about the research and going to Paris, even for the change in the time that she was an American going over to Paris, looking at the change in hair, for example.
Well, and also, you might talk about
that.
And when she comes back from Paris, not only the hair, but the rest, the clothes.
Yes, well, of course, she's had such a change, and she's had a chance to see something of the world, and it makes a big difference. And the European clothes were definitely more sophisticated than the American clothes that she had seen. In fact, everything that was stylish was in some way brought back from Europe at that time. It was way before we had our own American designers.
What did you, when you say research, where do you go to look for a period like that? I mean, I know that if it's 1950s or something, it's easy. You just go to the Saturday Evening Post or that, or whatever, or Ladies' Home Journal.
Paintings of the period, and paintings and magazines, periodicals.
I remember Alona, Jane's assistant, again. She's getting a lot of coverage.
Yes, a lot of violence.
I remember when we were in the muslin, because in the fittings you're more often than not in the...
We do a muslin first.
A muslin first, and I was just in the muslin of the Paris dress that I returned in, to Washington Square, and I remember Lona just looking dreamy-eyed and said, "Oh, there's nothing like a Paris cut." And it was almost as though she'd forgotten that Jane had designed it. She was almost like she was getting caught up in it, but that's how authentic it was. It was just, oh, Paris cut.
I understand that you're such a stickler for detail that even the underwear of a modern dress has to be exactly right.
I was telling a story about the musical we did and how you designed the underwear for the chorus. Because she felt that if they didn't have the proper underwear, they couldn't behave.
They couldn't feel.
Well, I think for any actor, they need to have it all right, and then they feel as though they are.
Yeah, but that's,
character.
why you're so good. No, it is.
Makes
I mean,
the
there's
actor
awareness, sensitivity to the actor. It is about, because after all is said and done, it's about that.
It's like
no matter what we do,
I mean, it's
they
the
come to
same
see
as
her.
the set design and John Lee putting Dr. Sloper's name on the door that the people in the audience don't see, but the actors know. It's the same thing with what's underneath the clothes. You know, it's all part of making the actors feel as well as we can that they are those characters, and then they're able to give those glowing performances. But, you know, all of us together, I think, in some way, make it's not just one aspect of it. It's that wonderful kind of group and makes the wheel turn round.
Where did you study?
At the Central School of Arts and Crafts in London. And then I went to Oxford Repertory, where we designed a new play every 3 weeks. That's a hard job, and once you've done that, it's sort of an experience for life, really. A year of that.
Where would future costume designers go today to study?
Well, there are many good schools today.
Like
Do you
Yale.
teach?
Like Yale. I teach at Yale.
Yes, that's
And I think it's a good design school.
Unplug.
Thank you, George.
I think NYU is a very good design school. There are many, but I must say I am partial to Yale.
What about lighting? Can we go through that?
favorite.
Where would you go?
Costume design.
Where would one study lighting today? Or the theater?
I didn't study lighting. I studied dance at Sarah Lawrence College with Bessie Schoenberg for 3 years, and worked assisting Tom Skelton, assisting Jules Fisher, and worked as many little shows as I could for myself. And it's interesting to sit beside the master, just one seat away from the hot seat, and watch how they deal with the problems. And you get a lot of it. It's an old-fashioned apprentice kind of system that works very well.
Well, we were mentioning, and you alluded to something that I wanted you to do a little bit technically. You said, well, it all began to change with the invention of the LECO light. And for our audience and for our edification, would you explain that a little bit?
A LECO is a specific unit that was invented in the 40s, but mostly it's the control of light. We're getting better and better at it. The equipment is more and more sophisticated, so prior to that there were the footlights we talked about and some lighting of the scenery with a few general sources and soft-edged things, and now one can be extremely precise, and there's equipment now that will change the color so that if you can have a small space and only enough room for one light there, as on the Heiress, you can have 3 or 4 colors there, or 20 or 40 in a machine that changes the color. There's moving lights now that you also can control with computers, and we use that.
You might talk about
in
that
this
opening
very
thing
realistic,
with the
in
coach
this
going
very
by.
realistic play, we do use a couple of IntelliBeams that give us the impression that there's a carriage moving out on the street because you can see the light go across the ceiling. But in a play like this, you don't want anyone to know that you've done anything as complex.
Beverly, in the Heiress, we were talking earlier about the fact that you create the illusion of sunlight and a little bit of moonlight coming on from stage left. You also use the fireplace, firelight, and lamplight to appear to illuminate the stage, but you do have quite a few instruments out front, supplementing, what looks like natural light. How many are out front?
I don't know how many are out front. I think overall there are about 400 units on the show.
I also wondered, you have the stage fairly brightly lit at the end of the first act, and then, of course, for the curtain call. Are there instruments that you use only at those 2 points and not any place else in the show?
Yeah.
I have a feeling. What about those lamps? How do you make them go on and off on cue? And then, of course, Cherry carries one upstairs, so it's obviously not tied down to wiring.
There are now batteries and tiny little sources that look very good, as if they were candles. But John Lee provides the lamps. I mean, he's done the research on what the fixture should look like, where the source should be, and my job is to find a bulb that fits in there and then can be controlled with the board.
It actually drives me crazy in the Heiress, and Jerry had to punish me during rehearsals because it really would take them a lot longer to light all those lamps. You know, that would be a big project, and that's why we would have a maid go around lighting the lamps. But it turned out to be rather tedious to see someone
turning the window.
Yes. Would have added 10 minutes running time to the show.
That wasn't a good idea, and Jerry just had to stop complaining.
It's a play.
It's not a light show.
You always have to find the balance between the reality and what's going to make the magic. I mean, I think none of us can be too dogmatic about what's right and what's wrong. It's got to be what makes.
On the other hand, I'm always fascinated with people who say they don't know anything about anything, but we've been exposed to so many movies that actually are fairly well researched. The movie version of The Heiress is quite well researched, actually. And people who say they don't know anything about it, it doesn't matter. It does matter a lot of times because people feel what's right and wrong because we've been exposed to a lot of things, and we know a lot. As a designer, I have to believe that we know a lot more things visually than we are aware of ourselves knowing. That's why people can look at something and say, I don't know what's wrong, but something's wrong. And there are a lot of things that we collectively recognize. One thing on The Heiress was, Cherry mentioned the stairs going up to the front of the house. I think everybody in New York, whether you remember it or not, but everybody in New York really knows that those houses on the north side of Washington Square all have a flight of steps going up to the front of them. And even if you didn't remember it when you saw it, you might think there was something a little strange if the people didn't go down when they went out the stairs or up to enter. And you can't, it's an instinctive lack people feel when you get things a little too wrong. You can get them a little wrong, like getting the maid with the lamps, but you can't get them way wrong, or people get uncomfortable and then...
Well, it affects the actor, too. I mean, if an actor is going to enter, instead of from a long stoop, in the period, you don't just step over a threshold and say hi. You know,
actually, I do think that they swear. I think they do swear when they start up the stairs. It's a long climb. Skirts.
Yeah, skirt. Yeah. Upstage.
Right. I didn't know that one. I'm fascinated.
Where
I was teaching her one day how the lady of the period would carry her little bag. A lady of...
How to what?
Cherry, how a lady would carry her bag. You'd carry your little bag like this.
Because I have my little traveling case when I think Morris has arrived, and I go and I pick up my little traveling case, and of course I was carrying it like I was, you know, going out to Long Island for the weekend. And of course, John Lee Beatty told me that I had to carry it this way because, in the first place, the skirts are so big that she would really have to be a weightlifter to carry it, you know, so that of course they would carry it here.
And when you see them carry it there, all the clothes make sense because they're made to fall properly for her.
And you can't, in those clothes, you can't do this. It's all just in this small range because hopefully
that might be your role.
Practicality
in teaching her how to hold the bag.
Well, I think it's a shared thing. I think that I trained as an actor, and I know a lot about period, and the way people behave in different periods. Jane was my teacher. She wasn't teaching at Yale then. She was teaching at Juilliard. And she was our costume teacher, and it all makes sense. People behave in a way that the clothes allow them to behave. And there's all reasons for it, and all of them organic.
I used to have the actors sort of put clothes on and act different or behave as they would in different periods. And they love to do that. And I would say, now look in the mirror and look at your silhouette. And don't be frightened to look at yourself. This is the time to really concentrate. Not that actors are ever frightened to look at themselves, I don't think. But I really wanted them to look at their silhouettes and see how they behaved. I must tell this little story that Christopher Reeve was at Juilliard at the time when I was teaching. And a couple of years later, I was out at BAM with my daughter seeing Twyla Tharp ballet, and Christopher was in the audience, and he came up and said hello. And she'd just been to see Superman, and I could see her eyes were out on stalks that he had come up and said hello to me, and I introduced her to Christopher, and he leant over and he said, you know, it was your mother that taught me to use a cape. And I thought she was going to die and go to heaven. And she looked at me in a totally different way.
It's called respect, right?
That's wonderful.
John Lee, we've talked about the fact that the scrim...
Brown University, English Literature, Yale School of Drama.
And do you teach?
I taught for 9 or 10 years at North Carolina School of the Arts, and I am taking a break right now from teaching. I got taught out.
Did you do anything before? Were you an actor?
I acted and directed and wrote in college, but I have absolutely no retention of anything ever said to me, and I can't speak any lines. I can't remember what to say. So it was very useful to have done it, and but I always wanted to be a set designer since I was 7 years old. So.
But didn't you do puppets?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
For many years, I had my own puppet
I've heard this story 1,000 times.
So let's hear it.
Yeah. No, he had his own little puppet theater.
I was very shy, and for a certain period of my life, I didn't talk to people a whole lot. So I made puppets, and I had little hand puppets and string puppets and rod puppets, and this is so embarrassing, but I took over the garage of my house, and I had my own little theater with a fly system, and actually it was a complex. It was like Lincoln Center. I had the big stage, and then I had a little one for the miniature sets, and then a medium-sized one for the marionettes. It was an arts complex.
I think Turnabout is fair play. I want Ralph to comment on the set that he designed at the Monomoy Theater in Chatham years ago for the Heiress. He designed the Heiress, you designed puppets.
Good for you. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't for puppets. I remember the staircase, but that's about all I can remember. It seems like it was a drawing room. But no, I did some set designing in days gone by in a previous life.
Where did you study?
Well, I never studied much theater. I always just did it. And for instance, all this stuff is self-taught. I mean, you kind of, there's not much of a, maybe now there are places to study it, but there weren't years ago.
I studied with Harry Burnett, you know who he was, of the Yale puppeteers?
Oh,
not
sure.
At Yale. Not at Yale, in California, but
Yeah.
he was a famous puppeteer. It was very weird, though, to have a puppet school.
Right.
It was very odd.
Well, I grew up in Vermont, and there was nobody there to study with, and I had a puppet show when I was a kid too. I was one of those strange kids. But I would take my show. I guess I still tour, but I would take my show to birthday parties and to schools and do little productions there. And I must say that the first year that I, well, as a so-called adult, started doing these shows that incorporated masks and giant puppets and so forth, I was sitting there watching the play one day, and I thought, gee, this is just what I was doing when I was 12, only the scale is a little bit changed now. And I think there's a definite link there still.
I want to know, though, whether Sherry was like doing little plays in her garage.
Jane was dressing up paper dolls, and Beverly had flashlights going, and I mean that's the thing about the arts. We make our childhood last for.
And the rubber balls with the thing. I remember, yeah.
It is true. It's actually that. Sherry's saying you make your childhood last forever. Because I started designing scenery when I was 7, and
I have to say, we did a play. It was really a horrible experience. I won't mention it. But in the middle of hell, we were in the middle of hell. There was puppets in this play. And we were in the middle of hell. Did I mention that we were in the middle of hell? And it was a filthy, awful, terrible place to be. And there was John Lee Beatty in the corner, happy as a clam, putting red hair on the puppet. And combing the hair on the puppet. And he looked like a 5-year-old in the middle of hell.
John Lee, I have to know how, with a set that has walls with big chunks just scrim, so that we don't have flats and we don't have all the wood, what holds up the ceiling? Do you have it suspended, and the candelabra, do you have it suspended from the flies or something?
yeah, that's, you know, it's really scary. If you analyze the Heiress and you build scenery, there's very little holding it together.
Philip Bosco noted that one day.
The ceiling is hung, and the ceiling is totally transparent, translucent, so there's no framing over the center part. And that chandelier, they tried to be very accurate and drop a line and cut a little hole and go right through it and hold the chandelier up to it. And one day they had a little accident and ripped. But it's very scary. And the lace had to be installed in the theater because there really is no frame holding anything together. So it's stretched from place to place to place. And of course, if you think about it, those mirrors, which are actual real glass, are very heavy, and they're self-supporting. But and the paintings are actually made of scrim, because we have to see through the paintings as well, and they're computer printed on scrim with a layer of brown clear plexiglass behind them to look like what an oil painting would look like if it were transparent, and those of course have to be suspended too.
I have to interrupt at this point, unless you're willing to spend the weekend with us, which I would like very much. I think even then we wouldn't have time to continue and explore this. But this has been the American Theatre Wing's seminar on design, and earlier we presented to these wonderful artists the American Theatre Wing's award and check for design in the theater. And unlike the Tony Awards, it went to off-Broadway as well as Broadway. And the American Theatre Wing has long believed that talent has no boundaries. And this panel is a very, very good example of that. It's coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and it is just one of the all-year-round programs of the American Theatre Wing. I thank you all for being here, and I thank this wonderful panel for their generous time, examples, and the wonderful puppets that we've had here, and also your knowledge. Thank you so much for being here.